This video will review some of the setup and customization options in NMUS Plus for Sierra 4.0. NMUS Plus is the software protocol that runs the NMUS 1 hardware device. We're going to start in the navigator. When you open the NMUS Plus tab in the navigator, you can see different nerves, muscles, and structures to select from. You can also choose whether you see a list of just common nerves, or you can see all the nerves. This list can obviously be filtered by anatomical region as well. To set up what is shown in these lists, you can just right click on a specific region. So I right clicked there on the nerve, or on the forearm, and here I can see the nerves, muscles, and structures that are set up in the forearm. And right from here I can choose whether or not I want to have that listed as a common nerve, or hidden means it won't show up at all. Common means it will show up in the common filter. So if you want to use it at times, then you would keep both of these unchecked. If there's a nerve that you plan to never use, you can check this box, and then that nerve will never show up. And you can do the same thing for muscles and structures. This also gives you a place where you can add sites to a specific nerve or muscle or structure. Just come over here and click the plus button, and then you can choose which site from the anatomy database to add. If the site isn't present here that you want, it's best to add sites in another place, and I'll show you that later. So we'll go ahead and open the software. Like our other protocols, NMUS Plus comes with different windows, and each window has a cogwheel. The cogwheel is how you set up the specific options within that window. So if we look at our image window here, we can go to the cogwheel and we can see a few different options here. This first option basically just makes it so anytime you select a new site or new anatomy, it starts scanning automatically. That may not be desirable if you want to scan and then choose where you want that scan to be saved. The autosave annotated images, when that is checked, that means it's going to automatically save an image when you mark it either with a measurement tool or an annotation, typing text or something on it. If you uncheck that box, then you will just manually save the images by using the F3 Save Image button, or the Store button will save the image in advance to the next site. When that box is unchecked, it also gives you the option to clear screen on site selection. So if you're manually saving images, then you can tell it to clear the screen every time you choose a new site. That's automatic with the autosave annotated images on. You have an option to show grid. So if we turn that on, you can choose either 5mm or 10mm grid, and this is going to just put a grid dots on your screen to show you a little bit better representation of depth and width of the aperture of the image. So here we see this is a grid of 1 centimeter or 10mm, both vertical and horizontal, and we can change that to off or 5mm. The marker, the show midline marker, when it's set for marker, we see this arrow. When we can change that also to a line, or we can have that completely off. By default, the marker is shown and the grid is off. Annotation size is just the font size for the annotations that you're going to see on the image. You can set that there. And then the font size here is basically the font size for the other text in the image window, such as the sites. If we look down on the left-hand side of the image window, we can see our different mouse tools. We can have a select tool, a zoom tool, measurement tools, and annotation tools. These measurement tools will be set up in test setup, and we'll show you that later in the video. In the results window, we have a cogwheel here where you can choose how to sort the results, and you can choose font size as well. If you want to add sites to a particular structure, in this case I've selected the left median nerve, you can see we have 3 sites selected here, and because we see an eye, we have additional sites hidden. If you want to add a site on the fly, you can just hit the plus button and select a site from the anatomy database. If the site doesn't exist, you can just type in the site. Doesn't exist, we'll just say test, for example. And that new site is going to come in underneath the site that was selected. If you want to keep this site for future tests, go to Edit Save Test Parameters. You would have to have permissions to do that in your user permissions, and if you're using a CADlink server to store your preserve files, then you'd also want to, once you close this test, update the CADlink preserve file. So that's how you can add a site on the fly. You'll notice when we added that site, you have an option to make that site hidden, so then it would only show up when you click the eye icon. Most of the other customizations within the software itself can be done in the settings window. So the settings window is hidden by default, but we have the F5 button set up to open that up. So we click F5 and that brings up our settings window. Within the settings window, there's 4 different tabs. There's basic, advanced, time gain controls, and presets. The basic and advanced are just settings for your image and probe, so you can see kind of your basic depth, focus gain, etc., and then your advanced image settings such as speckle reduction, spatial compounding, etc. Time gain control is how you control your time gain in the image window. You can always control the overall gain from here, and also from the knob as well. The blue knob will change your main gain. And then presets is how you can create or add presets to your list of presets. You can get to this list obviously through here, or there's a drop-down list in the top window as well where you can choose a different preset. To create a preset is quite easy. Just set up the image, get an image how you want it to look with the correct basic settings and advanced settings if necessary. Make sure the focus point's in the right spot. And this is going to be saved for all modes, so make sure the correct mode is selected. And then just go to presets and click plus, and then type in the new preset name and hit OK. And that'll add that preset to your list of presets where you can select it here on the fly when needed. If you want to update the default preset, just make any changes you want to the image settings, and then click the plus button to start a new preset, but call it the same as the default. In this case, the default is NMUS. And then just check the box to overwrite, and that will overwrite that default preset with your new settings or your new image settings. Clicking settings again closes the settings window, and those are most of the settings that you'd change within the test screen itself. You do have the option to right click on the F keys and adjust what the different F keys do. So you have a font size here, but you also have the ability to customize the F keys. And this brings up a window here where you can choose what the different F keys do. So you have 6 F keys that you can customize. F7 is always navigator. And so you can just drop down and select what you want the different F keys to do. In doing this, just make sure you have all the main functions available to you so you don't lose any functionality when customizing the F keys. The rest of the test setup and customizations are done in our test protocol editor. So I'm going to go to Edit Test Protocol. Doing this is going to make changes to all future tests. It won't make a change to the test we're in currently. To change the current test, you'd want to go to Edit Current Test. But this is where I go if I want to change all the default settings moving forward. I just wanted to bring it up here so you can see what settings are associated with which part of the software. So if we go down to the NMUS Plus protocol, we can see all the different setup options within that protocol. This is similar to the NCS Plus setup. If you're familiar with that, this will be pretty familiar to you. You have different tabs across the top. You have test type, general, reference limits, and the anatomy editor where you edit the anatomy database. Under test types, you have 3 different tabs. You have nerves, muscles, and structures. This allows you to have different custom settings for different types of anatomies, in this case nerves, muscles, or structures. For each test type, it has the same screen that you can set up in different ways. So we'll start with the nerves here. You can name this. You can have a short name for this particular test type. You can choose which mode is your default mode, and then you can choose which preset you use for your default presets for whatever probes you have. And this is just going to give you the list of presets that you have saved. Under options, this is mainly reporting options, so you can decide how the results are shown in your report. So you can decide whether or not you want to see normals in your report. You can combine the different results tables This just combines the measurement and comments table, this combines the measurement and calculation table, and this combines all your tables. And then you can decide whether or not you want to show the left-right comparison table in your report. The results section is how you set up these measurement tools here, and then the calculations is how you set up how to automatic calculations for different measurements. So if you look here, we have 4 different measurement tools set up for the median nerve, and so when I'm under nerves, you can see here that we have a trace tool set up, an ellipse tool, a caliper tool, and a line tool. You can add additional tools by clicking the plus key, and it gives you another tool at the bottom where maybe you wanted a different tool, maybe an angle tool, for example. You can select angle, and then you can choose what you want that to measure. In this case, I want it to measure an angle. And then you can decide whether or not you want to have a normal column for that particular tool in the results table, and then whether or not you want to see a left-right comparison for that tool, and if you want a normal column for the left-right comparison table. So that's all set up in one place. If you want to move that tool, you can move it up or down the list. You can also make another tool, basically copy one of these tools and have 2 of the same. So if I want one trace tool that measures area and another tool that measures something else, I can just click the plus, and that gives me a second trace tool. And then I can decide maybe with this tool I want it to measure circumference or volume. Let's just say volume, for example. So now we have this tool measuring volume, where you can choose whether or not it has a normal column next to it when you use that tool, and again whether or not you want to see a left-right comparison of that result, and whether or not you want a normal value for the left-right comparison. And so now if we set this up in your testing screen, you would have 2 different tools, one on top of the other, and when you hover over them they would tell you whether they measure the area or the volume. I'm going to delete this tool out. You can also have one tool measure multiple things. So I can choose this trace tool, and right here at the top I can choose how many measurements I allow these tools to have, and I'm going to change this to 2, and then I can come over here. I've already set one up, but I can choose a second measurement. So in this case I chose circumference. I chose that I did want a normal value, and I do want to see a difference between left-right comparison, but I don't want to see a normal column there. So now I can decide when I use this tool, the trace tool, it will measure both the area and the circumference of whatever I trace. So that's how you set up different measurement tools. If there's a measurement tool that you just want to change what it measures, just simply click that tool so it's highlighted, and then change what you want that tool to measure. The calculations section is how you measure different calculations or create different calculations between images. So you have the ability to create calculations between different nerves or muscles or structures or different sites within one of those anatomies. So in this case you can see we have a median nerve selected as nerve 1. The site that we're going to use for the first calculation is the wrist, and then we have the median again is nerve 2, and the second site is the forearm. Then we select what measurement type we want to calculate. In this case we were going to make a calculation on the area, and here we selected the ratio as a calculation to make. And then again we can choose whether or not we want to see a normal value. We can decide whether or not we see the left-right comparison table, and whether or not we want a normal value for left-right comparison. So you can set up any calculation between because we're in the nerves tab, you can set up different calculations between different nerves or the same nerve in different sites with the calculations table. The comments table allows you to set up what shows up, what comment columns are available, and some preset lists of comments that you may make. So here in the comments table, I've created, using the plus button, 3 different columns, and then I've named them mobility, vascularity, and comment. And then within these two columns, I'm going to have these choices. I can just double click here or click here, it does the same thing. And that's where I can go ahead and add as many selections as I want. These will show up as drop-down options within my comments table. And then once you have everything set up for the nerves, you can go to the muscles and make any changes or customizations you want for the muscles anatomies, and then for structures. So you can set up different measurement tools and calculations depending on if you're doing nerves, muscles, or structures. The General tab is where we keep kind of all the miscellaneous things that affect the entire exam. So for example, you can have default locations for exported images and CNAs. You can decide by default whether or not you want to clear the annotations and measurements on next site selection. This is also available in the cogwheel. Same thing with start scanning on next site selection, also available in the cogwheel. You can tell it to auto download CNAs, so when you're connected to a Catalog server, it's constantly streaming the CNA files to the server, and then when you want to open a new study, when you open that study, this will tell it to automatically just start downloading any CNA files that are sitting on the server. So typically you want that to be checked by default so that those can all be downloaded and available to look at. The only time you'd want to uncheck that is maybe if you have a really slow network connection between you and the server and you don't intend to be reviewing CNA, ultrasound CNA images very often. Autosave annotated images, similar to the same function that's in the cogwheel, where you can decide whether you want it to autosave images once they're annotated. And then here you can decide whether or not you want to see the grid lines. If you're using the grid lines, again in the cogwheel, you can decide whether or not you want to see them in your report images. And then lastly here you can decide what color theme you use for the ultrasound software. If you're using a lighter color theme for your default settings, you may want to have the ultrasound software come into a dark theme so that you have better contrast and lighting when you're scanning ultrasound. The next section is results, and this is how you can set up what decimal places your results have, as well as what units of measure. So to use this tool to customize these things, you just choose the result. For example, if we want to look at depth, then you can decide how many decimals you want to see when you're measuring depth, and then what unit of measure you want to use for that particular measurement. And you can do that for any of the things that we measure. Custom keys, this is how, if you want to use the StimTroller as a remote control for ultrasound, you can determine what the different buttons in the StimTroller do, as well as what the foot switch button does using ultrasound. You can also customize what the pulse width buttons on the base unit do and what the average button does. Our defaults are to use the pulse width buttons to adjust depth and the average button to enable and disable Q mode. And then lastly, you can edit any of your text annotations here. You can add new ones, delete ones, and rearrange the order, or you can choose to sort the list alphabetically. Reference limits, we will cover this in another video, but this is where you can come in and create reference limits for your different ultrasound anatomies. And then anatomy editor, again, we'll have another video that explains more in depth of this, but this is another place where you can come in and enter the sites if you want to add sites or anatomical locations. So for example, in the top here we have nerves, muscles, and access points or structures. Nerves and muscles, those lists should be pretty comprehensive, but on occasion you may need to add something. You can choose to add that particular nerve, but more importantly, you may need to add sites to a nerve. So in this case, you would choose the nerve in question, median for example, and then over on the right hand side, we can choose the NMUS Plus sites and add what sites we need for that particular nerve. If a site isn't available that we want here, so when we add a site, if we can't find the site that we need, this list comes from the access points. So first we'd want to add that site as an access point. So we go to the access points, add a site here, and then those would be available as a site in ultrasound. Then if you recall earlier in the video, I showed how to add sites on the fly within the test. That's a much easier way to add sites because you can just free type any site you want and then use edit save test parameters to save those moving forward. That's the main reason to go into the anatomy editor, is if you want to adjust or add sites. Again, those can be done in other places. So that covers the test setup for NMUS Plus. I'm just going to hit OK here. That would save all those settings for future tests. But just to review, what we just set up, or the way it's set up now, is I have the wrist set up here. You'll notice it's on auto save image. And so if I'm running and I scan a wrist measurement and stop, if I use this tool, I know because of the way I set it up that it's going to measure an area. And there I'll see the area, and in this case it shows the normal value column because that's what I have set up in the test setup. Then when I move on to my next site, I'm going to choose forearm. It's already remembering this, and I'm going to scan the forearm and then measure the forearm. It's going to measure the area, and then this is where it shows up the calculation that I had set up to calculate the ratio between wrist and forearm. So this is our measurement setup, this is our calculation setup, and then lastly this is showing you our comments table, which we could set up in the test setup screen. So we have 3 columns that we'd set up, and in these first 2 we had selections, and in the third one there's no selections. Even though there's selections, you can still free type anything you want here just by clicking and typing. And those are the main settings and setups that you'll do to customize NMUS Plus for Sierra 4.0.